What's up guys, hope you're having a good day. In this video we're going to be breaking down the fight between Antonio Araujo and Joaquin Buckley from a gambling perspective. So if you're thinking of betting this fight this weekend, I hope you're going to be able to use the information in this video to make better betting decisions and maybe even earn some extra cash. And please hit the like button on this video for me, and as soon as this video gets 100 likes I'll be dropping the next breakdown video for UFC Fight Night Spann versus Smith. You can check out my YouTube channel right now for other breakdown videos on other main card fights on this card, and if you'd like to watch my breakdown videos for all the prelims, check out my website MMABettingTips.com. On there you'll find a range of bets for every UFC event, breakdown videos for every prelim fight, as well as lengthy 1 to 2 hour videos on every single fight, documenting my research on each of these matchups. But for now, let's dive straight into this fight between Buckley and Araujo. Let's kick things off by taking a look at the odds. Joaquin Buckley, one of the biggest favourites on the card, currently at average odds of around about 1.47, which is minus 213 for an implied probability of 68%. And if we take a look at the odds on Araujo, he is currently around about an average of 2.75, which is plus 175 for an implied probability of 36%. It's a good stylistic matchup this for Joaquin Buckley, and if you're thinking about in this matchup, really you've just got to consider, whether you're willing to pay the price on Buckley as such a big favourite. So in this breakdown we're going to be focusing a lot on Joaquin Buckley's weaknesses, because if both these guys show up and perform to their full potential, Buckley should win easily unless Araujo can land something crazy. So that's going to be the main focus of this breakdown video. Let's start off by considering the X factors on this matchup. So Antonio Araujo's 32 years old, 6'3", with a 73.5-inch reach. So Araujo is a very big middleweight, but he has been cursed by a really bad case of T-Rex arms, because a 73.5-inch reach for someone that is 6'3" is just a very, very short reach. And this real short reach does have an impact and an influence on Araujo's style of striking, which we'll talk about in a moment. If we look at Buckley, he's 27 years older, 27 years old, so a little bit younger than Araujo. He's 5'10" with a 76-inch reach. So what's very interesting is there is actually quite a big size advantage here for Araujo, but he's actually, got a shorter reach than Buckley, which is kind of crazy. So Buckley's going to have just under a 3-inch reach here, which is nuts, because when these two guys face off at the weigh-ins, I would expect Araujo at 6'3" to absolutely tower over Buckley. Buckley is very small for a middleweight, and I would expect him at some point in his career to drop down to the welterweight division. With this wingspan, 5'10" with a 76-inch reach, he should be fighting in the welterweight division, but for whatever reason, he's fighting at middleweight at the moment. But what this does mean is that Buckley's going to be undersized against most of the guys that he faces, and Araujo's definitely going to have a big size advantage here. So there is one more X factor that is a pretty significant one to take into consideration in this matchup, and that is that this is going to be Joaquin Buckley's first fight back after suffering a pretty brutal knockout at the hands of Alicio Di Chirico. Now, this is not the first time that Buckley has been knocked out. We can see that he was knocked out earlier on in his career against Jackie Gosh, but this is only the second time that he's been knocked out as a pro. He got knocked down a few times against Kevin Holland, but this is just my way of making the point that Buckley is there to be hit. We've seen Buckley knocked out a couple times in his career, dropped a few times by Kevin Holland. Araujo is a big, strong, dangerous striker, and so the first risk factor with Buckley is that he's a very aggressive guy. He likes to come out the gate very fast, loves to bait his opponents into reckless exchanges and bet on his chin, power, accuracy, and boxing against theirs. But we have seen Buckley dinged, dropped, wobbled, knocked out, knocked down a decent amount of times in his career, considering he has only had 16 pro fights and he is only 27 years old. I think Kevin Holland dropped him like 3 times, so it does just illustrate the fact that Buckley's there to be hit, and that's a big risk factor considering he's fighting against a dangerous striker like Araujo, especially when you take into consideration that Di Chirico's just not that dangerous. If we look at Di Chirico's record, tons of his fights have gone to a decision. He's a bit of a decisionator, so getting knocked out by this guy is not a good sign, because Di Chirico's much more of a volume striker. This is quite significant because this will be Buckley's first fight back after suffering his first knockout loss in the UFC. And we know that it can take fighters, particularly younger, more inexperienced fighters, quite a while to get over knockouts. Sometimes the symptoms they experience from a concussion or a really bad knockout is pretty grueling. And, sometimes the rehabilitation can be quite debilitating, which does affect the fighter's confidence. And so, it'll be interesting to see how Buckley bounces back from this really bad knockout loss, because if he suffered a lot of nasty symptoms or side effects from that knockout at the hands of the Chirico, he may not have the confidence anymore to come forward as aggressively and recklessly as he could in the past, which is a good thing because it might make him fight a little bit safer and a little bit smarter and not put himself in so much danger. But it also may not be a good thing because it may detract away from the very thing that Buckley is good at, which is putting his opponent on the back foot, pressuring him, and forcing him to basically fight in a defensive shell and really be in a state of survival mode when you're in there against Buckley because of how aggressive he is when he comes forward. Every time Buckley comes forward, he's loading up, throwing heat, sitting down on big power shots that if they land are going to knock you out and hurt you really bad. And if Buckley starts to fight a little bit safer, a little bit smarter, a little bit more tentatively, that may mean that Buckley's just not as good as he is when he's using that style that got him to this point and got him to the dance. So it will be interesting to see how Buckley bounces back from this knockout loss. And it's always a risk factor to bet on a guy, especially a young, inexperienced guy like Buckley, in his first fight back after a really bad knockout, because it can take guys a little bit of time to get over it. Sometimes they never get over it. We'll see what happens. Buckley seems like an aggressive, confident, young, hungry bull, so I'm sure he'll be fine, but it's just something for you to bear in mind. Now, another risk factor which is derived from the fight against the Chirico and the nature in which Buckley lost was that he did get knocked out by a head kick. That's quite notable here because Antonio Araujo has a very heavy kicks-based style of striking. So Araujo's boxing isn't very good. Remember earlier on when we were talking about the reach differential and we were saying Araujo's been cursed by a real bad case of T-Rex arms? This also personifies itself in his style of striking because his boxing just isn't very good. His hands are not good and he doesn't really throw many punches. He has much more of a kicks-based style of striking, fights with his hands low and likes to have that time and space to set his kicks up. This is what makes this such a good stylistic matchup for Buckley, because Buckley's got a very heavy boxing-based style. The strikes that Buckley throws are predominantly punches. We all know him for his highlight reel kick knockout of Impa Kazangane, but Buckley is a far better boxer than he is a kicker. And so, with Araujo having that kicks-based style of striking, Buckley having that boxing-based style of striking, whenever you've got a kicker and a boxer going up against one another, the boxer usually has the advantage, because if we think about it logically, it's easier to punch someone in the face than it is to kick them in the head. It's easier to throw a higher volume of punches than it is to throw a higher volume of kicks, because when you're throwing kicks, you need the time and space to set up your kicks and get your kicks off. When you're a boxer, you can pump the jab, you can chip away at your opponent, you can find your range a lot easier with those punches. And Buckley, being a pressure fighter, the kind of guy that likes to come forward and put his opponent onto the back foot, means that Araujo is going to have even less time and space to get his kicks off than he would if they were to fight in the middle of the octagon. Buckley's not going to play that game. He's going to come forward, put Araujo on the back foot and force Araujo to fight in an uncomfortable range, which also puts Araujo in a lot of danger because his base is kicking. Like I said, very kicks-based style of striking. The problem with a guy like Araujo is that when you pressure them, instinctively they try to counter your forward pressure with kicks, which is a very bad idea because when you're throwing kicks, you've often got your hands down low and your chin up high and exposed. So a lot of the time, when you see a kicker like Araujo trying to alleviate pressure with kicks, it will just result in them taking big headshots because their opponent is going to be able to walk through those kicks, load up on their big power strikes and, land some big shots on Araujo. So this is a very, 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 very difficult stylistic matchup for Araujo. Make no mistake, everything that makes Buckley a good striker is hell for Araujo. Buckley's going to be able to walk through those kicks, pressure Araujo, take away the time and space he needs to throw those kicks, and give Araujo hell, to be quite honest with you. It's a very difficult stylistic matchup for Araujo, this. It's also a difficult stylistic matchup for Araujo because his gas tank is a little bit sketchy. Does tend to slow down a lot as the fight goes on, and into the second and third round he does become very sloppy. So while he may pose a decent threat to Buckley in round 1, the longer the fight goes the better it gets for Buckley. But it is quite significant that Araujo does have a predominantly kick-based style of striking, because of course the Chirico caught Buckley with a head kick and knocked him out with a kick, in his last fight. So perhaps Buckley is susceptible to that head kick. Bit too early to say, but the head kick is probably Araujo's most dangerous weapon, and he does inflict major damage with his kicks. This guy delivers big power, and because of his size, his length, he's able to get those legs upstairs and deliver pretty nasty head kicks quite easily. But he does slow down as the fight wears on, so if Buckley can make it out of round 1, this does become very difficult for Araujo. And the thing is, with Buckley's style, where he likes to come forward, pressure his opponents and force him to react to what he's doing, force him to counter-strike, force him to fight on the outside, that's quite exhausting for the fighter on the outside, having to react to what their opponent is trying to do to them, which will just accelerate the rate at which Araujo slows down and, really cause Araujo some issues, because he does tend to slow as the fight goes on. Now, both these guys are primarily strikers. I'd be surprised if this fight went to the ground. Buckley, at times will shoot takedowns. Araujo's pretty weak off his back. I don't think grappling's really something we should focus on here. This is probably going to be a stand-up fight, and even if it does go to the ground, Buckley's probably going to be the guy taking Araujo down and kind of holding him down from top position. Araujo isn't a very good grappler. We saw that in his last fight against Deron Wynn, and also in his UFC debut against Andre Munoz. Don't get me wrong, Joaquin Buckley's not a very good grappler either, but I don't see Araujo being able to take Buckley down because of how compact, how strong, how physically imposing Buckley is. And Araujo he's not the best grappler, he's not the best offensive wrestler. It's unlikely he's going to be able to upset the balance of someone as athletic and physically strong as Joaquin Buckley. So if we bring this full circle and summarise everything we've just said, what does all this stuff mean from a betting perspective? Well, if we look at the odds, Joaquin Buckley absolutely deserves to be favoured here. This is a great stylistic matchup for him, but his advantages for the most part are largely baked into the odds, right? He's a big favourite, 1.47, minus 213, gives him an implied probability of 68%, which means you've got to give him a better than 68% chance of winning in order to find any value. I wouldn't take Araujo here. It's just not interesting to me. I don't care that he's a big underdog. Fact is, this is a bad stylistic matchup for him, and he does tend to slow down as the fight goes on. There's not much upside to betting Araujo. Sure, he can win. He can land something big. He can catch Buckley and knock him out. But if both these guys show up and perform to their full potential, this is a very difficult fight for Araujo, so he's not the kind of guy I'm interested in betting. If you want to bet this fight, if you want to take Buckley, you've got to decide whether you're getting a good risk to reward ratio on your money. Just know it's Buckley's first fight back after suffering a really bad KO. He was knocked out by a head kick in his last fight against the Chirico. That happens to be one of Araujo's best weapons. And just know also that when Buckley does come forward and attack his opponents, he's very reckless. He puts himself in a lot of danger. You know what they say? When you put yourself in a position to finish your opponent, you also put yourself in a position to be finished. And while Araujo, isn't the best boxer, I wouldn't rule out Buckley walking onto something crazy and getting dropped. We've seen him dropped against Kevin Holland, Alessio De Chirico, and that dude earlier on in his career, which you mentioned, whose name I forget. But the point being, it's not like Buckley's got a granite chin. It's not like he's great defensively, and it's not like you can trust him to not get dropped here. So from my perspective, Buckley should win. He's the right side to be on. I just don't know if you're getting a good deal on your money with him being such a big favourite. It's not for me. I would have loved to have hit Buckley if his odds were a little bit better, up in that 1.60 to 1.7 range. It's not there, so this is probably one of those fights where you've got to be disciplined and pass. But I do think Buckley gets it done. I hope you found that useful. Don't forget to bang a like on this video below. As soon as we get 100 likes, I'll be dropping that next breakdown video. Also, check out my website, MMABettingTips.com, for breakdown videos for all the prelims on this card, as well as a ton of bets for every UFC event. Thank you very much for watching. Take care. Love you all, and I'll see you in the next video.